Still in domain number 1, security and risk management, we're now going to talk about global, legal, and regulatory issues. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about some of the types of threats that we might see from a global perspective. One of the common threats is a crypto locker ransomware threat. This could be delivered via a virus, phishing attack, or other fraud schemes. But crypto locker ransomware is where the application gets access to the target computer through its operating system. It can be propagated via email system, infected emails with attachments, or within a botnet where a command and control server is controlling a set of computers to deliver this malware through drive-by downloads or whatever. But the idea of any type of crypto locker ransomware is that it encrypts the files on the device or anything that's mounted to that device, like a storage area network or even locally attached storage with public key cryptography, RSA specifically, but it can be any type of public key cryptography. RSA is the Rivas-Shamir-Edelman asymmetric encryption process where you have a public key and you have a corresponding private key. If you encrypt data with a public key, you can only decrypt that information with the corresponding private key. That private key, of course, is what the bad actors, are keeping stored. And the only way that you can decrypt that data is if you have that private key. And this encryption is strong enough that realistically the work factor to decrypt that information without that private key is so significant that it's feasibly impossible, right? So you have to have that private key in order to be able to decrypt that information. And sometimes time bombs and whatnot will be introduced to, if you try to hack or break the system, that the data is going to get destroyed. I was watching an episode of Billions where the bad guy had Bitcoin or some sort of cryptocurrency stored on an encrypted hard drive, and you only had 10 attempts to break the hard drive. He's sitting in a room with not one hard drive, but 15 hard drives or something like that, and they are attempting to break into them or force him to give the passcode, and he lost $3.5 billion of crypto, but because the hard drives locked themselves. Very dramatic scene, but it's true. I mean, the same thing would go with Rsa Public Key Cryptography. Without that private key, you're not going to be able to decrypt that information. You'll get a message displayed on your screen saying, oh, we'll give you the private key and show you how to decrypt the information if you pay us some money. And we're going to give you a time limit to do so. So you have a week to pay us, or you have a month to pay us, or you have a day to pay us, whatever it might be. The reason it's called crypto ransomware is because you're essentially holding the data for ransom. Now, if you think about how effective this might be, right? A lot of people use cloud computing now, but in the past, I'm talking about personal use, right? We use cloud computing now. In the past, we used to store everything on our local laptop or local computer. Family movies, family photos, important financial documents internal to our household, stuff like that. How likely would it be for you as an individual if you had 10,000 photos that you've collected over the past 20 years of your child's life to pay a $300 ransom to make sure you get access to those photos? You'd be pretty likely. I would probably pay it. Of course, I would have backups, so I wouldn't need to. But, it's a very effective approach to, exfiltrating funds from an individual that doesn't necessarily want to pay. Which is why this number is probably way too small at this point. All right. Organizations that house data, hospital records or dental records or whatnot, they don't have appropriate backup mechanisms in place or protection mechanisms in place, their ransoms might be a lot higher, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. But, you know, these cyber criminals are smart. They know the value of that data. And they're going to say, you know what, they're likely going to pay because they, it would cost them so much more to try to recover that information in another way, or it would be simply impossible, and they couldn't. So they're going to pay the ransom. So this is kind of what it looks like. Oops, your files have been encrypted. All right, your payment will go up if you haven't paid within this date. Your files will be lost on this date, and so on. And typically they will, it used to be like MoneyGram and wire transfers. Now it's all e-funds or electronically transmitted funds like Bitcoin and Dogecoin and so on. So you can send the money. Most of the time, they will probably do what they're supposed to do and send you the key to decrypt the data. Because if they get a reputation of not doing so, it's kind of like that old movie adage, well, if I tell you, you're going to kill me anyway, so I'm not going to tell you type of thing. So they won't get paid. So from that perspective, they're at least ethical in that stance in that they will pay you. Right. Now, I like this part here. It says, can I recover my files? Sure, we guarantee that you'll recover all your files safely. But you have not so enough time. You can decrypt some of your files for free. Oh, trying to build trust, I guess, right? Click the decrypt button. But if you want to decrypt all your files, you have to pay. You only have 3 days to submit the payment. After that, the price will be doubled. Also, if you don't pay within 7 days, you won't be able to recover your files forever. You will have free events. We will have free events for users who are so poor they couldn't pay in 6 months. I don't know what that means, but it's pretty funny. All right. All right. Another type of scare is scareware, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be child pornography. It could be anything, but I've seen scareware before in the form of, hey, we were able to activate the webcam on your computer, and we have recordings of you doing things that, you should really only be doing in private, and you probably wouldn't want it public. And unless you pay us, we're going to release that information, right? This is a little bit more dramatic because they will post potentially images of child pornography. They'll put your personal information in this little box, a username, what your operating system is, etc., to make it seem more realistic. And again, it's a ransom, right? You have to pay this ransom in order to for us to unlock your computer. Also, they'll put, you can see here, federal logos and whatnot, National Security Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Justice, that kind of thing on the image to make it seem more, scarier, I guess. All right. The Citadel ransomware is an example. Reviton also displayed a warning of crime, typically copyrighted material or child pornography. But again, something that's going to, scare you into doing something. Again, these things come in all forms and all shapes and all sizes. But typically they all use the same basic technique, right? This one maybe doesn't incorporate the use of cryptography, but it does provide private information, and it states that you've committed some sort of crime. Fake or rogue antivirus software, also very, very popular. I've had family members that have fallen victim to this particular type of scam. You visited a website, you downloaded some freeware, some shareware, which included some applications that you didn't know existed in that application that you were downloading. And then all of a sudden, you're starting to get these notifications of, viruses on your computer. My aunt fell for this actually, and of course they scanned her computer and said, "Oh, you have 27 viruses on your computer. Call this number, and we will fix it for you." And then of course she calls the number. And then the person on the other line says, "We need access to your computer." She actually provided them access. They did a bunch of very official looking things on the screen while she watched and said, "We can clean this, but it's going to be $30 a virus," or something like that. That's exactly how antivirus companies work, right? We're gonna charge you per virus. And she didn't have the money, of course. So she said, "No, I can't do that. I'm just going to have my nephew look at it." And they got upset and they wiped her computer and locked her out. And she was not able to recover any information from her computer. Right? These things come in all shapes and sizes. I was literally, I'm not even making this up. I received an email last week about my McAfee LifeLock protection plan that I was being billed $750 for my 2-year protection plan, that the bill wasn't paid and my protection was going to get canceled if I didn't call. So I called the number and it was a Houston-based area code. An individual came online. Definitely did not sound like they were from Houston. I kind of played around with them a little bit. I think I was on the call for about 30 minutes, acting like an old person, changing my voice, etc. "You want me to do what?" And just playing around with them. And then eventually, when it got to the point where he wanted me to install something, I kind of let him know what I thought. But so these scams come in all forms, right? Here's an example of the fake or rogue antivirus software. Your payment has been leaked. You are at risk. I've seen this a lot with email addresses as well. If you use an email to log into a website, they'll say, "Oh, your email has been compromised," or it shows up in a database of compromised emails. Please log in to change your password, and so on. They're all kinds of tricks. With virtual numbers and voice over IP and everything else, it's so easy today to facilitate these scams. All right. Cybercrime, of course, is always a concern. Cybercrime typically is using cyber techniques to gain access to confidential information, to steal intellectual property, to gain access to secure systems, to disrupt services for an important organization, to damage the reputation of an organization by defacing a website or whatnot, and to steal money or to steal valuable information. There is a report that gets published every year called the Data Breach Investigations Report. It's actually published by Verizon, which is a very, very comprehensive, I would recommend you take a look at it, a comprehensive report on cyber-related crime and cyber incidents. These are just some snippets from the 2021 report. Different types of attacks. You can see denial of service is pretty high up on the list. Social engineering attacks are pretty high up on the list. Lost or stolen devices, not really significant. Privilege misuse, not really significant. 85% of the breaches involved human elements. Now, these are all out of context, right? You have to look at the report and see within the scope of context how these apply, because denial of service is very low here, but it's very high here. So again, it's based on context. These are just snippets from the report. 61% of breaches involved credentials, which was 4,518 documented breaches. This is 4,492 documented breaches. So clearly this isn't, everything that's happened globally. This is based on their sample size, if you will. Ransomware, 13% of non-denial of service incidents involved ransomware. 10,027 count. I'm not sure what that N actually means now. If that's a numerical value, it seems like numbers should be higher. But anyway, again, go look at the report. It will explain it in detail. Interesting report. So by definition, what are some of the components of licensing and intellectual property? Intellectual property is anything that refers to the creation of mind. All right. It could be software. It could be a book. It could be a recipe. It could be a process or a procedure that you follow. Whatever. It's a creation of the mind. And intellectual property can be protected with various mechanisms. You can have copyright laws to protect written works. You can have patents to protect designs, industrial design rights based on just proof of use or time of use, the right that protects rights that protect trademarks, trade dress, trade secrets, and so on. Trade secrets not as much, because trade secrets are internally protected. But intellectual property can be tangible or non-tangible, and it's divided into basically two categories. Industrial property, these would be patented items, trademarks, industrial design, geographic indications of source, and copyrights, which are literary and artistic works, which include written works like books and poems and music and movies and so on. Okay. Within the context of industrial property, trademarks, whether it's a registered trademark or just a service mark or whatnot, will have different protections. A patent, for example, means that in exchange for you publishing specifics on how something works and how it's designed and how it's built, we are going to grant to you, the inventor, for a limited period of time, the exclusive use of that product or that design. Once that time expires, then anybody can use that design. The K-cup, for example, in the coffee makers, right? The Keurig coffee makers, those were patented. And that patent ran out. So you start to see a lot of other vendors developing similar types of products legally. But it was protected for a specific period of time. So other vendors or other manufacturers couldn't duplicate that. All right. It could be a process, or it could be a specific process, a product. There's a utility patent, there's process patents, and so on. But it is a form of intellectual property. It does hold value, intrinsic value, as well as financial value. There has to be patentable requirements, right? Its usefulness, non-obviousness is very important. You can't patent a pencil, for example, a writing utensil. I mean, I suppose you could patent a type of pencil, or you could patent, the incorporation of a separate tool to a pencil and so on. But if it's, and it can't be something completely obscure and useless, even though some people might classify some of the patents that exist as obscure and useless. But it excludes others from utilizing that invention for a period of time, unless authorized, right? You can authorize other entities to do branding or whatnot, to sell your product with their own branding and whatnot. But after the time expires, the patent period expires, it becomes public domain, right? Under the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, patents available in the WTO member states for any invention in all fields of technology and terms of protection available should be a minimum of 20 years. All right. You do not need to know that for the exam, just a piece of information that's useful. Trademarks and copyrights. Now, trademarks are interesting because you can have a trademark that gets applied to a logo. Let me bring one up here real quick. So what you're seeing here is a logo of my alma mater, Texas Tech. You'll notice here there's a couple of different distinctions. For example, this logo has a circle with an R. That means that that is a registered trademark. That means that that is protected legally. They went through the process of hiring a lawyer, submitting an application to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office that says we are officially registering this logo as our logo. Is that making sense? So that is a protected logo. As opposed to something like this where you see the TM. I don't know if there's any others here with a TM on them. But here's another one with a TM. This is a variation of the logo. The TM means trademark as well, but it's not a registered trademark. It is still protected, but it's not protected by a legal filing, as an example. You can actually trademark anything. If you have your own personal business and you've designed a logo for your business or some sort of slogan for your business or whatnot, you can trademark that logo and simply put the TM on it to indicate that this is intellectual property. What would happen if somebody copied this and started using it in their organization is then you would have to go and file a lawsuit and essentially prove in court usability of that particular logo. It could be on websites, it could be over time. I've been using this logo for 20 years. Here's proof that I've been using this logo for 20 years. So I want you to enforce the cease and desist for this person to stop using this particular logo, if that makes sense. Another thing that you might see is something called a service mark. A service mark is typically going to be applied to like a slogan or, some sort of temporary, marketing thing that the company might be doing and so on. You'll see SM listed under a lot of different slogans and so on. Here's an example. Disney Channel service mark indicates that this is kind of a temporary logo that's being used for something or whatever. You'll see the service marks in different applications. Regardless, all of these things are protected, right? Whether or not you have to prove that protection in court will depend, but a registered trademark is protected by law, typically for up to 10 years. Every 10 years you have to renew that registered trademark. Okay? But anybody can file for these trademarks. It could be a word, it could be a name, a symbol. Surprisingly enough, it can be a particular color, a sound. Now, color would have to be used in combination with different elements of the trademark, but colors can be protected. So, for example, you can say you can use our logo, but you cannot change the color of the logo. That color is protected. It's part of the trademark. Copyrights are going to, like I said, apply to written works, and the duration up to 100 years. It depends, but generally the protection is quite extensive. And again, copyrights are kind of inferred. You don't have to copyright every single document that you produce, but if you can demonstrate that you were the original producer of that work, that poem, that writing with that logo, that wasn't trademarked but was intellectually created, you can make sure that you get that protection. Even derivative works, variations of a public or published document are protected. I don't know what the threshold is to define it as unique versus derivative. Derivative would be changing, small percentages of a document or small percentages of a book, and then claiming that to be your own creation as opposed to creating something completely new. But the duration of copyrights is the author's life plus 50 to 100 years. I'm not sure what the distinction is with regard to the length, but I believe it's on the upper, the higher side there, 100 years. You'll have to look at specifically what it is that's being created. What is a trade secret? Trade secrets are not necessarily protected. It's not classified, but it's confidential. The formula for Coke, for example, never been published. It's never been patented. It is a trade secret. If somebody can reverse engineer it and figure out that formula and start to create their own product, then they are fully within their rights because it was not protected legally. Processes, designs, commercial methods, how we sell, information not generally known to the public, these could all be trade secrets. And generally people will maintain trade secret status because they don't want to be forced to publish information, and so on. All right. And that gives the company an economic advantage over its competitors based on that knowledge, that secret knowledge. Licensing typically applies to software, but it can apply to other things as well. For every $2 of purchased software, at least $1 is pirated. Licensing is changing now, though, isn't it? Because in the past, you bought software, and that's what you paid for. And you paid for the right to use that particular software application, and there were very specific fines that would be in place if, and even possible criminal prosecution, depending on the egregious nature of the behavior for pirating software, etc. However, now a lot of companies are going to subscription models. You get access to software because you pay a monthly subscription. Adobe does this, Microsoft does this, and so on. It certainly makes it a lot easier for the end user because as long as they have a paid subscription, they get updates to the software and they don't have to worry about, if I get a new computer, am I going to have to repurchase the software and whatnot because it's on the old computer. And of course, it generates a consistent revenue stream for the software manufacturer as well. All right. Organizations are responsible for ensuring compliance to software licensing requirements. I've actually literally seen one of our customers pay hefty fines to Oracle for violating their acceptable use policy and software licensing policies. And it was bad. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Pretty significant. Import and export. This is also heavily controlled. there was a regulation that was passed based on something called the Wassenaar Agreement, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, which control import and export of defense-related items. You know, we're talking about guns and bullets and missiles, etc. The United States munitions list allowed us to identify those defense-related articles that were controlled by this International Traffic in Arms Regulation. What's interesting is that in the past, traditionally, this has been traditional arms and armor and militaria and stuff like that. However, that's now been extended to cryptographic processes, cryptography and software, software applications, and so on. It doesn't apply to general scientific or engineering principles, but it applies to the use of these applications. When you purchase a Cisco router, for example, and that Cisco router includes cryptographic features, a canine image, if you will, which includes encryption and encryption standards, you are responsible for defining or identifying where that platform is going to be deployed. In fact, when you boot up the router, it will state in the boot up process, it will state whether or not this this information is exportable or this data is exportable. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. Cisco Export Agreement router. Let me see. Router message. Let's see if it pops up. Yeah, I don't see it here. Right here, maybe. Right here. Yeah, we get to see at least part of it here. Let's see, open in a new window. Come on. There we go. View image. Well, I'll just zoom in here. But you can see here it says, this product contains cryptographic features and is subject to the United States and local country laws governing import, export, transfer, and delivery of Cisco cryptographic products. Does not imply, we're missing some of it here, but basically the whole policy is listed here. Because this particular application includes cryptographic features, it has that restriction. This is a better image here. Third parties, authorities to import, export, distribute, use of encryption. By using this product, you agree to comply with applicable laws and regulations. If you are unable to comply, return this product immediately. And of course, you can see the details if you go to that link. That's based on the concept that cryptographic features was added to the USML, the United States Munitions List, which typically would only include things like bullets and guns and so on. So in 1996-97, ITAR classified strong cryptography as arms and prohibited export from the U.S. The Export Administration Regulations regulates the export of civilian goods and technology, equipment, materials, software technology, and so on. That's where the Cisco stuff would fall into that category. All right. As a security professional, you need to understand the regulations and guidelines that apply to your organization. What is the nature of the technology that you're using within the organization? How is that technology classified within your organization? Is it deemed or is it restricted by EAR or ITAR? Is it public domain? This is part of that whole concept of due diligence, and then finally enacting due care, and making sure that you're following the rules, right? Restrictions on publication of scientific and technical data. Are there restrictions? Are there restrictions placed on the organization based on the fact that the organization is receiving federal funding? The Wassenaar Agreement, I mentioned that. I'm not going to get into the details of it. I used to kind of go through the whole agreement, but I don't think it's necessary. Multilateral export control regime, 41 for participating states, including all of the Warsaw Pact countries, basically established regulations for accumulating militaria, right? Conventional arms, dual-use goods, technologies, nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction, etc., reducing the ability to accumulate that information or that type of product that would cause a destabilizing effect on the globe, or the nation states and so on. Privacy. What is privacy? How does privacy apply? When it comes to personally identifiable information, typically that's information that's being either processed or stored online that has pretty much, kind of predefined privacy conditions, right? Privacy in general focuses on how do I collect the information. Once I've collected, first of all, I have to be authorized to be able to collect that information. How do I use that information? Information is only supposed to be used for its intended purpose. How do I retain that information? And then ultimately, once I'm done utilizing that information, how do I make sure that that information is destroyed or at least no longer accessible to me as an organization? Now, privacy regulations do apply to different sectors. They can be kind of wide sweeping, what we call a horizontal enactment of privacy regulations. These are kind of your general standards for privacy that would apply to different business silos and different business sectors. And then we have industry-based privacy laws and regulations. HIPAA, for example, for the healthcare industry, Sarbanes-Oxley for the financial industry, etc., PCI for payment information or payment industry, and so on. That's what we refer to as a vertical enactment. Horizontal standards don't apply to just one specific type of business, but to all businesses, whereas vertical standards apply to only an individual type of business. The whole point of any type of privacy is to protect information, but in a way that it balances function, right? So we're protecting information, but we're not making it so impossible to protect the information that it becomes unusable, right? So there has to be a definition for the appropriate use of information within the scope or context of the business itself. There are always going to be overarching and kind of governing privacy principles that get applied, but privacy defines the rights and the obligations of individuals and organizations to collect personal information. Now, that brings up the question, though, what is considered personal information? That's a challenge, right? Because personal information could mean lots of things. You might define your maiden name as personal information, or you might define your date of birth as personal information. It's kind of funny how people tend to classify car tags as personal information. You always see the car tags are blurred out in a TV show or on social media or whatever, but yet people drive around with their car tags visible the whole time. So that one's always kind of confused me. I guess you don't maybe necessarily know who's driving on the highway, but when somebody's publishing information on social media, they want to protect that information for some reason. But car tags are kind of public information, really. But a social security number, very, very specific information to a user, credit card information, etc. That is very personal information. All right. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, just an example of an organization that defines guidelines for managing personal information. Number one, and all of these are going to make kind of logical sense, limit the collection of personal data lawfully with the consent of the owner of that information. Only collect the data that is relevant for the purpose of its use, the defined purpose of its use, and make sure that if that data is being used, that it's accurate and it's up to date. The purpose of the data collected is limited only to that purpose. It's not being shared or sold to anybody else. It's not being used for other undisclosed reasons. PII should never be disclosed unless permitted by the owner of that information or required by law for criminal investigations or whatnot. Data should be protected by security safeguards against loss. Unauthorized access, so loss is an attack against availability. Unauthorized access is an attack against confidentiality. Destruction, an attack against availability. Use would also be confidentiality. Modification would be integrity, and disclosure would be confidentiality. That's how the CIA triad kind of applies to these principles. The data owner has access to what data is being collected. They have the ability to challenge the collection of that information or the contents of the information that's being collected. They have the control of whether or not the data should be erased, should be rectified, should be amended, should be completed, etc. Okay. All right. A data breach. Now, data breaches have different levels of impact. A data breach is anything that violates the protection of private information. Whether it results in something negative or not, a breach is a breach. If private information is not protected and it's potentially exposed or documented as exposed, both of those quantify as or qualify as a breach. An incident is anything that affects the integrity, the confidentiality, or the availability of information. A breach is anything that results in the disclosure or, and this is really important, potential exposure of the data. Somebody could gain access to a server that houses PII, but they didn't actually get to the PII. They got to the server. So there is a potential loss of data, or there is potential exposure in that particular case. Data disclosure is literally the actual data was disclosed to an unauthorized party. As a security professional, you need to understand the different types of breaches that can occur. Obviously, there are different reporting requirements depending on the sector, business sector that you're in, and the type of data that's been exposed. Different reporting requirements, not only to the public, but to regulatory agencies and whatnot. And you need to have some sort of incident response, some sort of playbook that allows us to identify how we handle breaches within an organization. Containment is always going to be the first type of thing that you're going to try to achieve, but notification usually is high up on the list if a breach occurs, because people have the right to know if their data has been compromised in some way. Like I said, we have lots of relevant laws and regulations. The federal regulations, the Graham-Leach-Bailey Act, the Healthcare or Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, GLBA, like I said before, specifically applies to the financial sector. HIPAA applies to healthcare providers, health plans, business associates related to healthcare providers, and so on. Notice is almost always going to be a component or an element of regulations if a breach occurs. Not necessarily, public statements or media statements, although some regulations do require that, but certainly to regulatory agencies. All right. So you need to understand what industry you're in and what local and state laws apply to that industry so that you make sure that your security posture aligns with those rules and regulations. Okay?